So when it comes to CBR.com, the one thing that they love talking about so much is toxic masculinity. That's got to be probably their top subject that they talk about in literally every episode that they review, and The Last of Us is no different. We have an article that comes to us today from CBR.com and by a writer by the name of Sophia Schrock, whatever kind of last name that is. And I've done a video on Sophia's articles before, and almost every article she writes has something to do about toxic masculinity. So I'm going to assume fairly that she hates men. I think that's a pretty fair assumption at this point. And don't forget, guys, if you haven't seen my video about Sophia before, she looks exactly how you would think she looks. I mean, come on. At this point, it's pretty obvious. She's a hardcore feminist, I would imagine. Let's see what her bio says. Sophia is an avid fan of all things horror, goth, and queer. No shocker. They live in NYC and are an aspiring writer. Along with writing for CBR, they also write for Flicks. Okay, whatever the hell that is. Yeah. So this article comes to us today from CBR.com and comes to us from Sophia. And it says, The Last of Us subverts toxic masculinity, but it's not the first to do so. Before The Last of Us depicted survival in a world overrun by zombies, The Walking Dead showed and subverted tropes of toxic masculinity. Again, if you are in a post-apocalyptic world, right? If you're in a post-apocalyptic world and you're one of those people running around talking about toxic masculinity, chances are you're not going to live very long. You know what I'm saying? Like you're not going to be around long enough for toxic masculinity to even matter to you. You know, but let's see what Sophia has to say about The Last of Us. So it says HBO's hit series The Last of Us is dominating streaming services and social media, with fans obsessing over the show's adaptation of the popular zombie game. But it's not the first zombie television series to take over popular culture. The Walking Dead has remained popular for over a decade. I wouldn't really say that, but, you know, I could be wrong. With an accompanying video game, comic series, and multiple spin-off series. Both The Last of Us and The Walking Dead comment on toxic masculinity in a post-apocalyptic society. While some characters demonstrate how toxic masculinity can lead to violence and devastation, other characters subvert their toxic masculinity, geez, how many times is she going to say this, to help their communities and rebuild society for the better. Shows like The Last of Us and The Walking Dead use their male characters to reflect on masculinity's role in apocalyptic settings and how subversions of violent masculinity can push their stories further, as is the case with Joel and his growing relationship with Ellie. The thing is, do you think that the women are not violent in a post-apocalyptic setting? Do you really think that's not the case? We've seen women be violent all the time in a post-apocalyptic world. So why do you think this is only a toxic masculinity thing? Obviously, you hate men. Okay, we're just gonna get that out the way. It's very obvious you hate men, and that's perfectly fine. You're able to do what you want. You're able to like who you want. That's fine. You can hate men all you want. That doesn't make what you say true. Toxic masculinity is going to be the last thing that you're going to worry about in a post-apocalyptic setting, especially one that has zombies. If zombies were real, you think anybody gives a shit about toxic masculinity? Everybody's going to be walking around with weapons, with swords. Like, no, toxic masculinity is going to show in the most estrogen-filled people in the world. Like, you got to be kidding me with this. But of course, this is just a reason to try to tie political ideologies into a TV show that doesn't necessarily have it. It's just ridiculous. It says AMC's The Walking Dead takes viewers into a zombie-riddled world where everything has changed. But what happens when society crumbles around humanity? New values and rules emerge, leaving those with power and resources at the top of the food chain. The Walking Dead shows how a lot of men use this lack of structure to their advantage, and not necessarily for the good of everyone. A few of the main characters from the first seasons demonstrate toxic masculinity in its most vile forms. Merle is explicitly racist and sexist towards some of the survivors. Shane attempts to control and manipulate Lori and Rick. Again, do you think the women are not toxic? Do you think the women just skate by? Nothing happens. They're perfectly fine. They're all good. Nobody's evil. There's so many bad women in these shows, and yet you are completely running right over it because you want to go straight to toxic masculinity. You want to have a reason. You want to have an excuse to hate on men, and you're using this show as a means to do so. You're looking for ties when there is none. It says, as The Walking Dead progresses and eventually ends, audiences see a few of the characters grow and subvert the expectations of toxic masculinity. Rick Grimes, whose strict morals and police background bleed into his impulsive leadership style, eventually sacrifices himself to create the future that his son wanted. Daryl has a similar beginning as his older brother Merle, but as time passes, he learns how to cooperate with others and uses his skill to help fellow survivors. The Walking Dead's depiction of masculinity is nuanced, showing how traits associated with it can be both helpful and detrimental in a world where everyone must fight to survive. Again, this is called character development. It's not called getting rid of toxic masculinity. So, as a character develops in a world that is very evil to them and very mean to them, of course, over time, as they meet people that they care about, they're going to start wanting to be protectors instead of killers. So, I don't understand why they try to make this whole character development into something grander than it actually is. But of course, let's see what they have to say about actually the Last of Us now. It says, similar to The Walking Dead, The Last of Us subverts expectations of toxic masculinity in a world full of infected. The series goes so far as to change elements from the original game story, as it did with characterization of Bill in episode 3, Long Time. Bill is shown to have politics that align with libertarianism. He has a "Don't Tread on Me" flag in his bunker, and is perfectly fine surviving the apocalypse alone. As fans saw the Bill's episode, the expectations for his toxic masculinity are subverted with the introduction of Frank. Who had who? Okay, timeout. Who had expectations for toxic masculinity from Bill? Who had that? Is it toxic to want to be able to be a survivor? Is it toxic to be a survivor? Is it toxic to be able to say, okay, he's been training for this his whole life. He's a survivalist, a prepper, as they call it. So why would that have anything to do with toxic masculinity? Why? It just doesn't make sense. And then Frank showing up, you think because Frank showed up, all of a sudden he's toxic? Or is it something totally different? Is it something where the man realizes that maybe he doesn't have to just be all about survival? Maybe he can just let himself be a little bit vulnerable at times. That has nothing to do with toxic masculinity. It just has to do with character development. That's it. That's all it is. It says, as fans saw with Bill's episode, the expectations for his toxic masculinity are subverted with the introduction of Frank. Bill's sense of purpose is reignited as he opens up to Frank, Joel, and Tess, something that would have been unimaginable if he held on to his toxic masculinity. Bill's emotional vulnerability leads to viewers falling in love with Bill and Frank's relationship and demonstrates how queer love can survive despite all odds. So does anybody want to tell Sophia about the real story between Bill and Frank? Do you want me to do it? Do you guys want to do it? I mean, one of us should do it, because then you'll realize just how queer love actually is in a post-apocalyptic world. Not this BS that we got in episode 3 where we got the gay version of The Notebook. No, I'm talking about the actual true relationship between Bill and Frank, where they both hated each other. More so Frank against Bill than Bill against Frank. Frank couldn't stand Bill's guts and literally left Bill to go do his own thing, ended up getting bitten and committed suicide, but wrote Bill a nice little letter showcasing just how much he hated him. Joel is portrayed as a reflection of Bill, a tortured man who has lost everything he loved. He takes his role as protector very seriously, but beneath his curt mannerism lies a traumatized father. As depicted in the show so far, Joel is not an overwhelming leader. In fact, he's just as comfortable sharing responsibility with others, like his brother Tommy and Tess. At his core, Joel's main goal is to find his brother and begrudgingly accepts his responsibility to protect Ellie. However, as audiences can see, he's warming up to her. As they grow closer, his responsibilities shift to a father figure and mentor who tries and sometimes fails to keep her from facing the true horrors of their world. Again, though, that's character development. That's the whole point. Like, it's not, oh, he's given up his toxic masculinity. It's fucking character development. Do you know anything about that? I highly doubt this person knows anything about character development. She's talking through the lens of feminism. It's very clear. Just look at the way she types. She has mentioned toxic masculinity. I should have a counter for how many times toxic masculinity actually popped up in this little article here. So at the end of the day, this person is writing from the sense of feminism. They're looking at the show through the eyes of feminism. They're not looking at it through the eyes as a fan. They're not looking at it through the eyes of someone who actually enjoys the TV show. They're looking to see if the men act like women. That's what they want to see. They want to see the men cuckified as much as humanly possible. And unfortunately, with a lot of TV shows, people like this are getting their wish. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, consider leaving me a subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video, comment, let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.